schemed your death while you were worlds away. This is Odysseus now saying this. How terrible. Odysseus says, we almost all died because of Helen, and then there's Clytemnestra. True, true. So Agamemnon says at line 500, even your wife, he says, never indulge her too far. Never reveal the whole truth. Whatever you may know, just tell her a part of it. Be sure to hide the rest. Not that you, Odysseus, will be murdered by your wife. She's much too steady. Her feelings run too deep. Penelope, he says, is too good of a woman. But then he asks about Orestes, my own son, and this is going to be a typical thing here where the fathers will ask about their sons. And Odysseus will say, I've got no idea about Orestes, right? No way to tell you. I don't know. And that will be kind of the end of that conversation. The next conversation that we have here is with Achilles. And when Achilles shows up, he's with Patroclus and Antilochus, but they never talk. And then greater Ajax is actually, they're kind of off in the shades. And when Achilles sees Odysseus for the first time at line 535, he says, royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, man of tactics, reckless friend, what next? This is a line, by the way, directly from the Iliad. We will remember it from our study. And what greater feat can that cunning head contrive? Reminding us that in Iliad 9, line 378, remember he said, I hate the gates of Hades, right, where he actually is now, any man that says one thing and holds another in his mind. And here, of course, he's complimenting in some ways Odysseus as cunning. What daring brought you down to the house of death? And Odysseus, of course, will answer by saying, well, he says, I'm here because my life is endless troubles. We know this about Odysseus. And yet he says this, but you, Achilles, there's not a man in the world more blessed than you. There never has been, never will be one. Time was when you were alive, we Argives honored you as a god. And now, down here I see, you lorded over the dead in all your power. So, grieve no more at dying, great Achilles. In other words, he says, whoa, you were amazing in life. You're just as amazing in death. It's incredible. I reassured, Odysseus says the ghost. But, line 558, he broke out protesting, no winning words about death to me, shining Odysseus. By God, I'd rather slave on earth for another man, some dirt poor tenant farmer who scrapes to keep alive, than rule down here over all the breathless dead. This is important. Put it in your notes. Plato will reference that he says, in an ideal state, you got to get rid of Homer because of lines like this. I mean, we can't have soldiers hearing the greatest soldier of them all saying, I would much rather just be a poor nobody and be alive than be down here in the underworld, right? Notice, by the way, we continue with this idea that, as we said it in our study of the Iliad, that Achilles has clearly got a crisis of faith, a crisis of understanding. He's not interested in Timaeus, certainly not about Kleos. And it does beg the question, what is the value of Kleos to the dead? Virtually none. All of this Kleos is actually the fame. It's all about being remembered. It's all about for the living, right? And then he asks about his father, and he asks about his son. And he says that I would love to be home just one more time with my father, and if there's anybody messing with him, I'd jack him up good. Odysseus will respond by saying, I don't know anything about your dad, but Neoptolemus, your son, was amazing when he arrived. Never hung back. Only me and Nestor were more valuable in terms of strategy. He killed a really important Trojan fighter, Eurypylus, and then he was the one that wanted to get inside the horse. All the other guys, he said, by the way, another mention of the horse, right? And this kind of joins us back to Demodocus and the whole thing about the bard earlier, right? But he says, when we got inside the horse, nobody wanted to get in except for him. And he was a warrior all the way through and through. Never had a wound and left without any wounds. And we're told that at the end of this, that Achilles is so happy to hear about his son that he goes loping off at line 613 with long strides across the field of Astral. He's triumphant in all I told him of his son, right? His gallant, glorious son. Well, next we have Ajax. Now, this is not a story, obviously, in the Iliad, but after Achilles dies, the question is, who gets Achilles' amazing new armor, the armor that, of course, was made by Hephaestus for him in the Iliad. And the decision was made with the consultation of Trojan captives that it would go to Odysseus and not to Ajax. Ajax is so upset about this, of course we have a famous play about this as well, right? That he tries to kill Odysseus and the rest of the men, and when he can't, because he's slaughtering sheep thinking they're Odysseus and Agamemnon and Menelaus, he falls on his sword, he commits suicide. We have several suicides mentioned, by the way, in this book. And he won't He won't even talk to Odysseus. Odysseus blames it all on Zeus, and he says, come on, man, let's be friends or whatever, and Ajax just stalks off. Finally, to end this book, we've got several small little vignettes. At line 650, he sees Minos, the great judge in the underworld, then Orion, then Tityus, who's kind of like Prometheus, then Tantalus, and of course Tantalus is the interesting cat who thought he could fool the gods by feeding them up terrible meals, having them eat, be cannibals, and they caught him. And so what is his curse? Well, this is interesting. In the Greeks' understanding of the afterlife and underworld, you don't have, it's not like hell where you have like all kinds of punishments like Dante's Inferno will be. But a couple of people actually do have punishments, and one is this Tantalus, who stands in water, and every time he reaches down to get a drink, the water fades. And every time he reaches up to get a pomegranate fruit, the wind blows it away. This is where we, of course, get our word tantalize from. We then have Sisyphus, the great story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is actually often thought of as the great trickster. In some accounts, actually, he's considered the real father of Odysseus, right? He tricks even the god of death. And for this, famous, of course, he has to push his huge boulder. We remember about boulders from the Iliad, don't we? He has to push his huge boulder up a hill. He gets it almost to the top so he can rest, and then the boulder rolls right back over him. He's got to start over again. Some students have pointed out that, this is the greatest word picture for AP English. Right about the time you think you finally have got out, you got to go, the rock rolls down, you got to start it all over again. Odysseus finishes, interestingly, with Hercules. Next, he says at line 690, caught a glimpse of the powerful Hercules, his ghost, I mean. It, of course, is significant that Odysseus would finish with Hercules. Around him, the cries of the dead rang out like cries of birds. He's forever poised to shoot. The point here, interestingly, is that Hercules is actually himself up in Mount Olympus because, of course, he was allowed to wed Hebe. However, down here in the underworld is where his body is, right? He's got on this amazing armor. He's got this amazing armor that's been crafted by craftsmen. And we're told Hercules knew me at once. So the minute he sees me, he's like, hey, pal, you're here, right? At first glance, he hails me with a winning burst of pity. Royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, framed for exploits, luckless man, you too? And this is great. The you too is probably one of the brilliant rhetorical moments in this book. In other words, very subtly, what is Odysseus saying to the Phaeacians? I am a hero in the same status as Hercules, the greatest hero of them all, right? Braving out a fate as harsh as the fate I bore alive in the day of life, Hercules says, son of Zeus, that I was. My torments never ended, forced a slave for a man, not half the man I was. He saddled me with the worst heartbreaking labors, of course, the famous labors of Hercules. Why? He sent me down here once to retrieve the hound that guards the dead. Odysseus reminding, again, the Phaeacians, that real heroes go into the underworld, right? Well, finally, he leaves. Odysseus says, I wanted to see, like Theseus, another great Greek hero who had a journey to the underworld once. But he says, blanching terror gripped me because thousands and tens of thousands of these started rushing out and coming at me. And he says, I rushed down to my ship, we got in our ship, and we started sailing back to the island of Circe. Of course, here we have the idea that is going to be prevalent from St. Augustine on, that notion that when you die, you get to visit with the other dead and have conversations with them. Only here, Odysseus is able to say, I had those conversations and never had to die. We also think about T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men, that notion of those who have crossed with erect eyes to death's other kingdom, remember us if at all, not as lost violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. We'll come to these lines later. Okay, let's talk really quickly to think of it. One of the major messages here is there's virtually nothing that you can control once you're dead and gone, right? So in other words, the only control you have in your life is the control that you have while you are alive. Once you're dead, this text suggests there's nothing you can do, and all you can do is just ask questions about how is so-and-so, how is so-and-so. We're going to see this a lot in our reading of Dante's Inferno. That's why I'm mentioning it. Think about this argument too, that's a message that Kleos, fame, is only really useful for the living. The dead don't seem to care much about it like Achilles, right? Another major message, obviously, here is you do get what you deserve. Agamemnon jacks his own daughter, Iphigenia, And for that, when he has his homecoming, he gets jacked. Ironically, of course, he's concerned about Cassandra, who unfortunately is just a pawn in the middle of all of this insanity. At 2b, we said we were going to comment on symbolism. Let's do it. Obviously, the journey into the underworld itself, to the house of death, is one of those clear symbols. It is what makes a great epic hero, right? Why? Because it's kind of it symbolizes the ability to overcome your fear, right? In terms of irony, well, we've got a lot of it. Odysseus is the great liar. He's the great storyteller. You wouldn't cheat us, right? You wouldn't lie to us, Alcinius will say. But of course, Odysseus is the greatest weaver. Of all the weaving that gets done, especially by women in this poem, it's really Odysseus, right, who is the greatest of all weavers. The story, and he weaves it with such a purpose. He begins, for example, with the great women, because of course he wants to impress especially Queen Arete, and then he finishes with Hercules, because obviously he wants to be able to prove he's the greatest warrior along with Hercules, right? Well, I mentioned Hercules, so let's talk 3a really quickly. The Iliad, we're trying to obviously connect to. A return of all of the important heroes of the Iliad are here. Obviously, we're thinking about Achilles in his book 9 comments about, with his conversation with Odysseus, and obviously his conversation with Priam in book 24. Notice he's still, Achilles, struggling with this idea of the value of Time and Kleos, right? And Achilles made his choice to fight and die at the walls of Troy. Odysseus will make different choices. The Aeneid in book 6 and the journey into the underworld for Aeneas will be important as we get ready for that study coming after our study of the Odyssey. Dante's Inferno will be a little bit later, and we'll obviously build a whole lot off of this book. When we meet Dante and the Inferno and Dante the Pilgrim, we'll have to come back, obviously, to this book one more time to review. Beowulf, by the way, will fight Grendel's ma down in the underworld, or in below, it's kind of like a nasty place down there, and that's where he will kill her. In Gulliver's Travels, we have a very interesting moment where Swift will in fact have Gulliver having the ability to have conversations with the long dead, like for example Alexander the Great. What is your favorite text about such a trip, right? And this ability to somehow communicate with those who were already past. Which leads us to you knew this question was coming at 3b. You can pretty much predict this. If you could talk and have a conversation with just one person who has already lived and died, who would that one person be? And what kind of questions would you ask that person? Right? Of course, another question, we'll obviously join this one when we study our Dante. Do you believe in this notion that after you die, there is some place where you go to get what you have deserved, right? Either good or bad. And if that is the case, what do you think up to this point in your life you've lived a life that you would deserve? It's an interesting idea. And finally, what about this notion of fame or kleos? Do you buy the idea that in the end, the fame is really only about the living? Because the dead can't celebrate that. I mean, they don't even know about it. Do you buy that one way or the other? Okay, well, let's turn now to book 12. This will be the end of the 4 books that will constitute the, on the island of the Phaeacians. And Odysseus is actually not done with his storyline. Believe it or not, there's still some amazing stories left for us, and we'll pick those up because in book 12, he's going to come back to the island of Circe, and she's going to have a whole new bit of information for him. Well, I hope you're enjoying this reading and study as much as am I. Thank you.